Who in here has ever been to a restaurant before? Well, it's good to see some cultured people in the room. When you think of those moments, what comes to mind? It could be the food, it could be the great customer service, times with friends, or it could be just the chef screaming in the back. But do you ever wonder what happens after you leave? What happens behind the scenes? As someone who's worked in the restaurant industry my entire life, I can tell you that it might not be exactly what you think. As great as the restaurant industry is, it has some dark secrets. Secrets that are seldom spoken about. Today, we're going to reveal those secrets. But in order to do that, we need to look even further. We need to look beyond the plate in order to reveal the underbelly of the restaurant industry. And to do that, we're going to cover three basic topics. The first being food media and how food media has impacted the restaurant industry in a negative fashion. Going a little deeper, we're going to talk about the work environment of a restaurant, the true work environment of a restaurant industry, and how that culture has evolved around the basis of what food media has left it with. And finally and briefly, we're going to talk about the compensation of working in a restaurant, or should I say, lack thereof. And so, just to get straight into it, what exactly is food media, and how has food media impacted the restaurant industry? Food media is exactly what you think it would be, just online content in regards to food. When you think of food media, you might think of cooking shows like Hell's Kitchen, or you might think of YouTube channels and how social media has evolved. Who in here knows who Gordon Ramsay is? It's to be expected. When you think of Gordon Ramsay, you might know him for being a great chef, being the staple of the culinary industry. You might know him for some of his great restaurants like Hell's Kitchen, some of his great restaurants in Vegas, and some here in California. Or you might know him for some of his outrageous cooking shows like Hell's Kitchen, or The F Word, or Kitchen Nightmares. And you know, when we watch these cooking shows, it can be very funny to watch Gordon Ramsay throw a fillet at someone, or call someone an idiot sandwich, or really scream at people, and we find that entertaining. According to the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, the scream is acting as a buffer, removing the responsibility from us, the audience, excusing genuine trauma created by Ramsay as entertainment. Now, you might say, oh, it's just a TV show, or oh, it's just scripted, which I don't know, it might be, but the reality is these actions and these behaviors translate into the restaurant industry. It might be funny watching someone get yelled at on a cooking show, but what if that's their 9 to 5? What if that's what they're doing to feed their family? All of a sudden it becomes a little less funny and a little more stressful. And so food media has not only endorsed, but kind of encouraged the restaurant industry to adopt these violent and negative bullying-like behaviors, and developed a common misconception that in order to have an efficient restaurant, the chef needs to be an absolute jerk, which is completely irrational and not true. I've worked from fine dining all the way down to fast food, and I can tell you that's not the case at all. And unfortunately, with the restaurant industry setting this baseline of these negative attributes, it seems that the restaurant industry has only taken it a step further to things much worse. Let's take a deeper dive into the work environment. When you think of the work environment of the kitchen, you might think of it being fast-paced, crazy, hot, high stress, and you would be right. It's all of those things. Those are the things that a restaurant is put out to be. But you might not think of the things like the screaming or the bullying, or even further, the harassment. You see, the restaurant culture has developed around these negative attributes and has become much worse. One of those worst things being sexual harassment. Now, if you've never worked in a restaurant, you might not know, but sexual harassment is actually a pretty big problem within the restaurant industry. Sexual harassment has been idealized to be some form of cook talk and is seen as almost harassment within the restaurant industry. And a lot of the time, people who experience it just think that this is just the way it is. This is just the restaurant industry, and there's not much you can do about it. One testimony from the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism tells of one woman who went to ask her chef for a promotion, in which this is what she said. he looked at me with no amount of like guilt or shame or whatever, and he said, "You're the only in this kitchen who hasn't gotten on her knees for me yet, so you tell me." This kind of statement has no place coming out of anybody's mouth, and especially that of a chef's, of a boss, in a work environment, where people are here to provide for their families. And these kind of stressors and these kind of behaviors are very common. I myself have experienced and observed from the lowest level at fast food all the way up to 5-star fine dining, these kind of behaviors that are normalized and not really talked about and seem to be just the way it is. And that's a pretty big problem. And when you work in these environments, it leads to negative coping mechanisms, the most common being alcohol and other drug use. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, when you work in the restaurant industry, you're at the highest risk to being prone to substance abuse when compared to any other industry. With all of these negative attributes coming in, it's only natural that people find ways to seek coping. And unfortunately, restaurant culture has started to devise around alcohol and other drug use. One of my close friends, his name's Kiwi, we worked together at a 5-star fine dining location. And there was a problem with substance abuse on the job. And being 18 and 17, we didn't indulge in any of that. And so when we confronted our chef, or should I say, he confronted our chef responded with, "I do not care if you smoke, if you drink, if you shoot up, whatever. As long as you show up and get the job done, that is all that matters." What kind of work environment not only doesn't push away alcohol and other drug use, but endorses it? If you've ever seen the backside of a restaurant, you probably see people sitting out, being on a smoke break. And it can be very frustrating for someone like me in the middle of a dinner rush where I have hundreds of tickets up and everyone's screaming at me for what I need to do, and half the kitchen goes outside to take a smoke break. I'm like, "Oh, I want to sit down too." And I sit down and my chef comes and says, "What are you doing, Nathan? Stand up." Like, no sitting down in my kitchen. Like, what about everyone else? Oh, they went to go take a smoke break. In a way, it's endorsing me and encouraging me to go take a smoke break, to go involve myself in these alcohol and other drug abuses. And unfortunately, the restaurant culture has developed a culture around this. It's no longer a problem, but it's just the way it is. Personal testimonies from the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism show of people saying it's hard to quit because everyone does it. Or statements like, "I just do it because everyone else does it." And one man in particular reported of never being involved in any of it, entering through a restaurant, getting involved in the culture, and after leaving, being left with a whole lifetime of rehabilitation to try and get away from it. It sucks you in and it keeps you there, and it's become a part of the culture. With all this in mind, with the poor work environment and how media has influenced the restaurant industry, can you imagine doing all of that for low pay? Let's talk about compensation. The reason we all work. Whenever you see big time media stars like Gordon Ramsay or Guy Fieri or whoever comes to mind, you probably think they're pretty well off. And you would be right, they are. But for someone like me, the average fine dining line cook, or sous chef, or even head chef, it's not the same. There's a common misconception that chefs do make a lot of money, that media has put out there, and that's just simply not true. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average amount of money that one person was expected to spend in 1 year was $72,967. According to the same website, the median wage for cooks was only $30,910, and for chefs, taking it a step up, only $56,520. Meaning if you had a two-person household, both working as cooks, they still wouldn't even equal the amount that one person is expected to spend in 1 year. And all of these things considered, it can ultimately lead to a very poor mental state and can really diminish overall health and well-being. And so as we wrap up this talk today, I would like to make some things clear. First thing being, not every restaurant has these negative attributes. The reason that chefs and cooks do what they do, the reason that they work, is because they love cooking. That's the reason that I did it. But that being said, these negative attributes do exist. Food media has influenced and encouraged a bullying and violent culture within restaurants. And that has further developed into a negative restaurant culture centered around alcohol and other drug use, sexual harassment, and things much worse. And on top of all of that, all these chefs and cooks are experiencing this while getting poorly compensated, which, as stated before, really diminishes overall health and well-being. And so the next time that you go to a restaurant, for those of you who didn't raise your hand, the first time that you go to a restaurant, just take a moment to slow down. Take a moment to look around you. Take a moment to look beyond the plate. Thank you.